Prince Philip is William and Harry's grandfather and the Queen's husband. He married the Queen in 1947 and changed his German name from Philip Battenberg to Philip Mountbatten to cover up his German identity.
The so-called royal family which triumphed is basically German. They are seated on almost every throne in Europe. They are the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha-Battenberg bloodline, which often intermarries with the Hesse-Kassel German nobility and claim Jewish descent from the royal house of David in ancient Israel. They raise their children without love or compassion, breeding each successive generation to be at the head of a military establishment who keep an angered peace by use of fear, surveillance, and war. Contrary to what the royal spin doctors have written in the school history books, Queen Victoria was not popular. She was often hissed in public, and there were no less than 7 attempts to kill her. Keeping the populace ignorant, using adults and children alike as virtual slaves in workhouses, providing no adequate protection against hypothermia, working every man and woman to exhaustion, and imposing a crippling poll tax was the modus operandi of Queen Victoria and all her relatives sitting on the thrones across Europe. So-called Victorian values allowed children to be used as slave labor. Inhumane slums and widespread poverty was common across the whole of Europe right up until the 1970s.
Both of Philip's sisters married high-ranking German officers in the Nazi Party. His sister Sophie married Nazi SS Colonel Christoph von Hess, chief of Hermann Göring's Secret Intelligence Service. Prince Philip's German uncle, Lord Louis Mountbatten, was a central figure in secret communications between the British royal family and their pro-Hitler cousins in Germany. The authors of War of the Windsors state that Lord Louis Mountbatten had the nickname Dickie, and for good reason. Philip's uncle Dickie was the last viceroy in India, where he was a known pedophile who sexually exploited young working-class Indian peasant boys. Another book, The Kincora Scandal, connects Lord Dickie Mountbatten to a child prostitution vice ring in Belfast, Ireland. Authorities failed to intervene at the Kincora Care Home for Boys until 1981, despite reports over the years of child sexual abuse. The operators of the Kincora child prostitution ring were eventually convicted in 1981 of the ritual sexual abuse of defenseless young boys who were sold like prostitutes. No charges were ever brought against the VIP customers of royals, politicians, lawyers, and judges. Belfast citizens finally had reason to celebrate when Prince Philip's pedophile uncle was killed by an IRA bomb planted in his boat.
Lord Mountbatten was 79 years old on August 27, 1979, a day he set sail for a pleasure cruise in the Shadow 5, his 27-foot runabout.
Only about 10 minutes after they set off, there was a tremendous explosion.
The boat seemed to lift off the surface of the water before it splintered into a million whirling pieces. Bodies, oil, and blood rained down to float upon the water.
Lord Mountbatten's grandson, Nicholas, and the boat boy were both dead, floating face down in the water. Lord Mountbatten himself had both of his legs nearly torn off by the blast, and he was still alive, but he died very shortly thereafter in the boat that rescued him.
Lord Louis was, of course, accorded a magnificent funeral in Westminster Abbey, where he lay in state for days before his final burial and interment. One of the British tabloids said simply on the banner headline, "These evil bastards."
What kind of childhood did the Queen's German husband, Prince Philip, have? The answer can be found in a biographical book called Elizabeth, Behind Palace Doors. Philip's mother was Princess Alice Battenberg, granddaughter of Queen Victoria. She was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic and committed to a mental institution in Switzerland. Philip's German father ran off with a wealthy mistress, which left the boy parentless. Philip's uncle, George Mountbatten, became his surrogate father and legal guardian. Unfortunately, Uncle George had the same perverse reputation as Uncle Dickie. George Mountbatten kept a scandalous collection of child pornography that he bound into volumes and emblazoned with the family crest. Most disturbing were pictures of family orgies and bestiality in which children and animals were sexual participants. The question is, was George's adopted son Philip a participant? George Mountbatten's porn collection now resides at the British Museum, where it is kept in a hidden repository of artifacts deemed pornographic and unfit for public viewing. It is a well-known fact that child victims of sexual predators commonly identify with their abusers and grow up to become sexual predators themselves.